Welcome back to our 2025 Bayou Classic special. There's a lot more to break down for this game, but let's start with what really went wrong for the Jags. And instead of using words on how to describe this terrible situation, just look at your screen. The players' reaction says it all. Southern came into this year as the SWAC West favorites and even had the most first-place votes. So much hype surrounding them this year. And then we find out they added former LSU running back Trey Ollie, who was a top 5 recruit just 2 years ago. This team seemed destined for greatness, but from their first game against North Carolina Central, the writing was on the wall. Starting quarterback Jalen Woods missing the bus and getting benched, and it really just seemed to snowball from there. Reggie, what would you say what really went wrong for Southern?
I think the term fool's gold is apropos for Southern. I think we saw Southern in terms of the coach, and we saw a lot of the breaks go their way last year, team going to the championship, but we didn't count on Southern losing the linemen. They returned 4 linemen, but they had a lot of injuries and guys who had played but weren't necessarily that experienced. Yes. They had limited playing time. Almost the whole defensive line and linebackers, except for Kelby Givens, they're All-American. So you were replacing a lot of people on defense. You were replacing both corners on defense as Rodney Johnson transferred to Louisville. So there were a lot of people who looked on paper and said, well, Southern, seem to have done well in the transfer portal. They have enough guys returning, and looking in comparison to the rest of the Western Division, I think they have the best opportunity to win the West. But it was fool's gold, like I said, and you saw a team who didn't handle adversity well. You saw from the very beginning when they got down in games or they made mistakes, they never recovered from it, and that carried on throughout the year. You saw a team that lacked discipline. A lot of penalties, and I mean not just hustle penalties, penalties that were unnecessary penalties that hurt you during the game, false starts, undisciplined penalties like that backed them up, made them start behind the chains on offense. The defense staying on the field too long, not being able to do fundamental things like simply tackle. And so as those things started to mount up, the team got progressively worse. As injuries started to mount, it got progressively worse, and here we are now at a 1-10 season going into the Bayou Classic.
I think leadership too. This team, I think what missing from last year was the fight wasn't there as they had. Yes. No cardiac cats. They just kind of feels like they gave up in the second half of games. But when things weren't going their way, they kind of just rolled over. That's what it really seemed like. But let's just take a look at the stats. You can see a drastic decline pretty much everywhere, especially in the defense. That Dog Day defense is no longer there. Going from first, they were actually one of the best teams last year against the pass in the whole FCS.
Yes.
And then you drop down to 10th in the SWAC, giving up almost 100 yards more. Run defense, a huge drop, especially in the SWAC ratings. Scoring defense, pretty much 37 points per game. It's such a drastic decline. And I felt like they had, obviously, the talent to not be as good as last year, but not give up 37.
Well, you see, we had Derek Williams on here earlier talking about Coach Sean Wallace.
Yes.
Coach Sean Wallace missing from coaching the safeties. Herman Brister being injured, replacing Rodney Johnson, who was going to be your number 1 cornerback, a guy who transferred up to Louisville, like I said. So, and then you're replacing all of your defensive linemen but Kelby Givens. All of a guy like Derek Williams, like I said, who played linebacker, you're replacing your linebacking core. This defense was going to need time to gel, and I think that was something that was looked over. And you thought because they had the offense coming back, you thought Jalen Woods coming in as a guy who had experience, you had the offensive line returning, you thought that they would be able to make some hay on offense, maybe carry the defense, let the defense mature and gel. But the offense showed up, and like you said, from game 1 with Jalen Woods missing game 1, it was downhill from there. And that's the one thing. Southern hasn't had consistent quarterback play on offense the whole season. And it's carried over not only just offense, defense, special teams. Southern they weren't as talented. They aren't talented enough where one can pick up the other. They all have to play together and play as a complete team. And they just haven't done that this year. And we see that in the results of defense and offensive stats.
I know Terrence Graves, he was the one getting paid. The head coach always takes the brunt of the load. But how much was it really his fault? Like starting even from last year, bringing in assistants to his leadership, how much would you say it really fell on his shoulders?
The buck stops with the head man.
Yes.
You're the head coach, and that's at the end of the day, the bottom line is it all falls on Coach Graves. Now, even if he's delegated responsibilities and all of those things, he's the one who makes the ultimate decision. And if he wasn't making the ultimate decision, it all falls on him anyway, because he's the head man. He's the face of it. He is labeled the head coach.
Yep.
So if your team isn't playing well, if they aren't accomplishing the things that you need done, then some changes have to be made. I think if you look at the fundamentals of it, like I said, the lack of tackling, it wasn't. This was a structural thing,
Yes.
you know, in terms of lining up right, lining up correctly, making tackles, getting into the right plays, getting into the right audibles, the simple things that make football work. Southern wasn't able to do that all of this year.
Yeah, not at all. Especially with so many, the coaching staff, pretty much all of them returned.
Yes.
I think Ross was Willie Taunton to Savannah.
Fort Valley State.
Fort Valley State,
Yes.
That's what it was. But earlier in the week, I caught up with a familiar name in the Southern community, one you very much know, Perry White, the host of the Jaguar Journal and On the Yard Network. He gave us his thoughts on what went wrong on the Bluff. A lot of expectations for Southern this year. Obviously did not meet them, fell well below them. One of the worst teams in program history. What do you think went wrong for them this year?
You know, for me, most of all, maybe recruiting and development of players. We live in this day and age of the transfer portal, this, fix-it-quick situation. And college football is changing. And you have to have a culture to be able to develop up a locker room. And that locker room starts with young players. You get that transfer portal to plug and play, but you got to have that core in your locker room. And I just think for this year, when you look at that core, Southern didn't have it, even when it comes to leaders and standout players to be a part of this program. It just fell short. And I think when you saw that first game against North Carolina Central with Jalen Woods not starting that game, Cameron McCoy comes in. And then the very next game, Jalen Woods, who's on track to be a starter, has that bad injury that's pretty much kept him out for the rest of the season. So once it started from the quarterback position, it was a trickle down all the way across the board, in my opinion, for Southern.
I know Graves got fired, but how much was it his fault, just from Graves and the coaching standpoint?
You know, that's a tough situation to try to explain, because you talk about fault. You know, does it lie on one man, or does it lie on a committee of people? And that's your coaches. That's from your coordinators all the way down to your position coaches. And unfortunately, you know, when you talk about coaching, I have to look at the statistical side of things, offensively and defensively. When you look around the Southwestern Athletic Conference, Southern is either ranked 8th or below in every category, offensively and defensively. And even when you look at Southern special teams, you know, the miscues they've had on punts, on the kickoffs, it's just a culmination of everything. So it's hard to say, you know, point the finger at one guy, but one guy gets paid all the money. One guy is supposed to be able to be in that position as the head coach to take the brunt, or whatever goes wrong has to go to him. So unfortunately for Coach Graves, he fell into that boat of everything, and when everybody wanted to point the finger, it went directly to him. But I think as a whole, you have to look at the totality of it all, and that's the coaching staff from top to bottom.
Defensively, going from that dog day defense from last year, even 2 years ago, and then, like you said, taking that huge step back. What was the biggest reason why that defense is going from 16 points a game to 37 points per game?
I think when you look at the trenches for Southern University, the depth of what they lost last year on the defensive line, then you look at the linebacker core. What a lot of people wanted to hang their hat on was, of course, the defensive backfield. But they've even had issues this year. Then when you bring in the SWAC preseason defensive player of the year, and Kelby Givens, you know, there's only so much one man can do on his own. You know, and it is given opportunities for others to step up, but we have not seen it in terms of the defensive side of other guys stepping up. And plus, then you factor in injuries that has also been hurting Southern along the way. And it's just all a culmination of a recipe for just a disaster of what we